Childhood trauma causes telltale signs in adults. I'm going to tell you what they are and why you should stop beating yourself up for having them. It's not your fault you were abused and neglected in childhood, and if you've got some of the 12 signs of complex PTSD that I'm going to talk about in this video, it means you've got symptoms that follow a known pattern and that are normal. They're a normal response to abnormal conditions during childhood. I'm Anna Runkle, also known as the Crappy Childhood Fairy, and I teach people how to recognize and heal the symptoms of complex PTSD. I teach all about it on this channel, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that button so you don't miss any of my videos. Also, because when you subscribe, you really help this channel, as well as me and the team who helps me get these videos out fresh to you each week. So today we're talking about the signs you might have CPTSD, and these are symptoms that a lot of people don't realize are connected with early trauma. You might know some of them, but some of the signs I'm going to go over today just might surprise you, and they might explain a lot about why you struggle. Now, as I list these, you can write them down if you want, but to keep it simple, I can send you a self-assessment quiz where you can review the signs I'm about to describe to you, and I'll tell you how to get a hold of that at the end of the video. But first, I'll just tell you what they are, okay? Number 1, do you struggle with attention, memory, or focus? Yes, these are problems that affect a lot of people, but they're also common adult symptoms of complex PTSD. And by the way, complex PTSD is the kind that comes from chronic exposure to intense stress over time. This could happen at any age, but most cases began in childhood. Things like violence in the home, abandonment, growing up with an addicted or mentally ill parent, or a parent who's died or is in prison, or who just left and never came back. You'll hear me talk about childhood PTSD, which is just a common term for complex PTSD that started in childhood. And so, yeah, when these traumas and when neglect happens in childhood, you'll often see these problems with learning and focus and sitting still, not just in kids, but in adults later. And if this is you, you probably had a lot of shame dumped on you about not paying attention in school, as if it were a choice you made. And I wouldn't be surprised if you carried that shame into adulthood, and now you go into new shame when you're struggling with these very same learning and focus issues. And I just want to point out to you that when you got through trauma as a child, it not only affects a person emotionally, it can cause brain changes. Learning and memory and focus problems are normal when a person has gone through trauma, and I'll explain why in a moment. Now, the number 2 sign of CPTSD, do you tend to space out or feel physically numb when you try to make decisions or talk about your feelings? Okay, this is a sign of what's called dysregulation. And there's a distinct thing called emotional dysregulation, which we'll get to, but there's also brain and nervous system dysregulation, and it can develop in response to trauma, possibly as an injury to normal functioning, an injury that can be healed, by the way, and possibly also as a protective mechanism to guard a child's developing brain from the potential harm of serious trauma. Now, a child learns to just shut down and close off awareness of something that's too awful to face. This is a brilliant survival strategy for a kid, but it's totally a problem when it lasts into adulthood. When you're in a crisis or needing to make an important decision, the last thing you need is to lose your power of reasoning. But that's exactly what can happen when we're dysregulated. And researchers can see this in MRIs and brain scans. When you're stressed, brain waves and vital signs go out of their normal synchronous patterns, and they get out of sync, discordant, sort of the brainwave equivalent of a dog walking on a piano, just keys like banging and no longer sounding anything like music. That's kind of what it feels like to be dysregulated, right? Does this start to ring bells for you? You're numb, discombobulated sometimes, flustered, irritated. Do you have that sometimes when something triggers you? Along similar lines, here's the 3rd sign. Do you have trouble regulating intense emotions, having outbursts of sadness or anger when it doesn't seem appropriate? This is what it feels like to be emotionally dysregulated. And again, CPTSD isn't the only reason people get emotionally dysregulated, but it's very, very common. And with emotional dysregulation, you're going along and something triggers you. And usually it's something along the lines of, criticism, rejection, being judged, left out, overlooked, pressured to hurry, or just in some way stressed. And for people who were traumatized as kids, when they're stressed as adults, there's this very common response in the right front cortex where emotions are activated. And instead of the left front cortex being activated alongside it, this is where reasoning is supposed to kick in and help mitigate that emotional reaction. That left side is suppressed and the right side is just going bonkers. So reasoning goes down, emotions go up, and you get an overreaction. And it can happen with anger, it can happen with excitement, it can happen with intense experiences like falling in love. It's over the top. The emotions are going up, and they're not checked, and it can be hard to bring them back down. That's a childhood PTSD thing. And sometimes after a big upset, it's hard to feel anything. There's this numbness after the intense feelings. So emotions spike and then they flatline. And you feel like the world's coming to an end and then you feel nothing. And of course, for the people who love you, this can feel totally unreasonable and crazy-making and even frightening. And it can lead to arguments for sure. So that leads me to the fourth sign. Do you have more than your share of conflict with family and friends and coworkers? More than your share of conflict. This is how emotional dysregulation plays out. It aggravates ordinary conflicts. I mean, everybody has some, right? But it makes them worse. And of course, when you grew up without proper role models or guidance, you weren't loved properly, you weren't parented properly, you were maybe left to fend for yourself, or you were viciously punished for mistakes, ordinary conflicts can get blown way out of proportion. And it's a big reason why relationships with traumatized people so often get damaged and fall apart. It makes for a very painful way of life, full of loss and hurt. And many of us end up afraid to get involved with people at all. We're so afraid we're going to screw things up again. And that leads into the fifth sign that you might have CPTSD, that vulnerability around people. And you can ask yourself, do you find yourself avoiding social engagements because being around people is just too triggering? They are triggering, aren't they? So maybe you consciously avoid making friends or joining groups or dating, or maybe you do these things, but you hold yourself at arm's length. Either way, this is why so many people with CPTSD feel alone and isolated, even when they're with people, even when people are trying to help them and reach them and love them. And it's also why a lot of traumatized people give up on socializing and opt to live in isolation as the only way to get peace. Now this happens, but it is not the only way to being triggered is to remove yourself. In my courses, I'm always teaching people how to strengthen their ability to calm triggers around people and allow their lives to heal and grow and open up to connections with people. And if that's something you feel like you need, you can always check it out. I put the links to those courses in the description section below this video. But yeah, the stress around connection to people, either getting closer or splitting up, can be so menacing for people with CPTSD that they can go the complete opposite direction from avoidance. And this is the sixth sign that you might be affected. And you can ask yourself, does the fear of abandonment or of being alone cause you to stay in negative relationships? Oh my gosh, this is such a huge way that so many of us have thrown away years of our lives, staying way past when we wanted to leave, but the thought of leaving was unbearable. And the depression and the panic that tend to rise up around endings is so harsh. We'll do practically anything to avoid it. And this is complicated by the fact that we so often choose impossible people to be our friends and our partners. And that's the seventh sign. Do you find yourself attracted to unavailable, destructive, or abusive people? Now, this is not happening because you're a bad person, but because your ability to discern who's an appropriate and trustworthy person is diminished by dysregulation. Getting close to people causes stress, stress causes dysregulation, dysregulation causes that poor judgment, that then goes on to attach you to people who don't care about you or who can't love you. And this is how trauma so easily gets passed on through families and generations. You might be intensely hard on yourself when you look back and see the choices you've made, but it's kind of a stretch to even say this was a choice because CPTSD can trigger such unconsciousness and dysregulated thinking that it's very normal not to even realize anything's wrong until well into relationships. Now remember, you can learn to heal these problems. You can learn workarounds to slow that process down, and instead, you can develop healthy boundaries. Okay, the 8th sign. Have you suffered from depression, anxiety, or other mental health problems? These are well known to be associated with trauma, and it's connected to the 9th sign. Do you smoke cigarettes or use food, alcohol, or drugs in an addictive way? Because in the short term, these are actually regulating just for a minute, and they help soothe that intense emotional dysregulation for a short time, even though they lead very quickly into more dysregulation. The 10th sign is, are you overweight or do you struggle with overeating? Now, early trauma can alter your metabolism and the hormones that govern appetite and craving, which could explain a lot about why so many of us have trouble around certain foods or with stopping eating even when we're totally full. Now, along similar lines, the 11th sign that you might have CPTSD is, do you have unexplained health problems that seem to have no clear cause? I teach you more about this in my course, Healing Childhood PTSD, but early trauma is closely correlated with a higher incidence of everything from migraines, stomach problems, immune problems, all the way up to diabetes, heart disease, cancer. If your physical health is affected today because of your trauma reactions, that's just one more reason to take your healing really seriously and to take smart and self-loving action to change your pattern. Now, the signs I've listed so far are all about hard things, and some of them may have helped you feel motivated to start learning about CPTSD and how you can start healing your symptoms. But I just want to add the biggest reason that I see among my students for wanting to heal. And this was also what motivated me to heal so many years ago. And it's this: do you feel that you are unexplainably separate from other people and groups? That's it. We feel separate. We feel disconnected. We feel alone. And I just want to give you hope and let you know that there's a reason you feel this way. It's normal for people who were abused and neglected as kids, and it's not your fault. And while CPTSD it's not technically curable, you can learn to heal the symptoms, including this one, including that disconnection, okay? Now, I promised you wouldn't have to take notes on all this because it's all written down in a self-assessment quiz that I've linked down in the description section. I put several other resources down there too that I thought you might find helpful. And I lined up a video for you about the core central symptom that drives almost all other CPTSD symptoms, and it's dysregulation. And you can watch that video right here, and I will see you very soon.